We need to be able to determine if a relation is a function. There's going to be 7 questions. Of those 7 questions, there'll be 15 points. So I can determine if it is a function. I'm going to give you a graph. I'm going to give you ordered pairs, like a list of ordered pairs, x, y, right? And I might ask you to define it. So you might see a table, a graph, ordered pairs, which could be in a table, and then I'm also going to ask you what is that definition to explain it to me. And the easiest way to explain it, the function definition, which some of you did on that E7 project, when the question said, is it linear or nonlinear, you said each input has an output. That's the definition of a function. That's not the definition of linear, okay? Each input has one output. That is an awesome explanation for what is a function, okay? So there's going to be 7 questions, 15 points. The next standard that you want to write down. I can tell the story of a graph, and I can graph a story. There's 2 questions, 14 points. I'll show you in your review in a few minutes what that looks like, but I might have a picture of a graph, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what is happening in parts A, B, C, D. A through like F. So there'll be a graph and it'll have different parts of the graph, right? This would be like A, this would be B, this would be C, this would be D. So I'm going to ask you what's happening, like what's the story. So I'm going to give you a situation and then you have to finish it, okay? And then there's going to be one where I give you a story and I ask you to graph the story. And in your homework, in this review on E9, you're going to see these types of questions, okay? So they're right in your review. The next one is, I can determine if a function is linear or nonlinear. This is where I had some of you on the E7 project that we did, and when it was nonlinear, you said that there was a pattern. That's why it was, you said it was, most of them, like there's a couple people that said everything was linear. Because besides constant addition, there was a pattern. Patterns do not make it linear. So when you are thinking there's a pattern, like I'm going to show you on the one, it was y equaled each time you took the number times itself. And it was a parabola if you graphed it. Or when you graph that one, it's either exponential or a parabola. That's a pattern. That makes it nonlinear. For something to be linear, the key things that we are looking for is a straight line. We're looking for in a table constant addition. And if we're looking at our equations, right? So when I look at an equation, anytime I look at an equation, what I'm looking at for it all to be linear is that the variables are to the first power. What do I mean by variables are to the first power? Y equals mx plus b. Y equals 4. Y equals 2/3 x, something like that. So the difference is when we are talking about nonlinear, no more noises. When we're talking about nonlinear, we are talking about that it's a curved line, right? We are talking about it's not going to be constant addition all the way throughout. And some of you told me on that project, when you added 2, then you added 4, then you added 6, then you added 8, you said that was linear. You're not adding the same number is what we need to be looking at. So this one is going to be a curved line. And then if you are looking at your equation, when you look at the equation for nonlinear, you're going to have variables that are not to the first power. So not to the first power, if we look at that equation. Or it might be division by x, right? Division by x. And so you can look back at your notes for when we talked about that. There are going to be, of those 5 questions, this is going to be another 14 points. So some of them are worth more than others as we are looking at those. The last one, you are going to be looking at comparing the properties of the two. So this is pretty much like E8 homework. It is like what you did for today. I might give you a story, a table, a graph, and ask you to tell me the slope, the y-intercept. So when you look at the tables, graphs, equations, and the description, I might say, well, tell me which one has a larger slope, which one is steeper or flatter. I might ask you, when you are looking at their y-intercepts, which one charges less for their initial rate? So what is your lower starting point? Which one is not charging as much to start with? Or which one is your higher starting point? Something along that line. I might ask you to find for the 10th one, like we did yesterday. So I would say when you are looking at this, that last standard, that's why it's really important that I said you have to have E8 done to take the test. So on that last standard, those 3 questions are 17 points. So 3 questions, these are 17 points. E9, the first part, determine if it's a function or not. And notice with most of these, it asks you to identify the domain and range. Remember, domain, if you would please put for this, that is your x value. So I know it's been a while since we talked about that. The range is your y values, okay? Then you're asked if it's a function and to explain. And so the key thing that I am looking for is when you say what it is that you actually tell me why or why not, okay? So all the way throughout, you can kind of take a look. That first 2 pages of E9, you're asked, is it a function? The most common mistake I'll have people do is they'll say 12, and they'll tell me it's linear. It's not asking if it's linear, right? It's asking, is it a function or not, and explain. So on the test, I sometimes have people say, yes, it's linear. It's not the question. The question is it a function? So you need to determine the difference in those, okay? As you look at that next part, taking a look at 10 to 15, this is where I'm asking you to compare the properties. Oh, which one has a greater rate of change? Which one has a greater y-intercept as you are looking at those? So when you look at those questions as you are looking at on that page, the next page, if you would please kind of follow along with me, that next 2 pages, 16 through 25. Again, this is where you're talking about the slope and the rates of change and which one is greater and which one is less. And then here, starting at question 18 through 23, as we're asking, is it linear or not? So you're going to look at the graphs. You don't even have to explain for these ones. You possibly do on the test, right? So make sure you would know why it's linear or not linear. The last part, this is where you are telling the story. So they are telling you in number 24 that when you look at the question that you are, this shows the height of some joggers above sea level. So it says you are jogging at a constant speed for the entire trip. The graph is a relationship between 2 variables, time and height. So which one would be our x-axis down here? Time or height? Time. Time and always our independent variable. So when you are looking at this one, we want to put time, and then this is our height. So 2 easy points that people miss on those graphs is they don't label it. So you want to label it. And then the next part that you are actually going to be labeling is you are going to be taking a look at what is happening in our story. So there needs to be, in this case, the 5 parts. What are the 5 parts? A. First, they are jogging up a steep slope. Then they go down a small slope. Then they go up another steep slope, part C. Then they jog across a flat area, D. And then they go down a steep hill, E. So you need to have on your graph for each part of that line A, B, C, D. What is it going to look like? It's going to look like, not necessarily like these, but that's how you want to label it. This is part A, this is part B, this is C, D, okay? So as you are finishing those, this one again is asking you to come up with the story, right? You're going to explain it. Here, you're coming up with the story from the graph. So make sure as you're doing the homework that you check your answers in the back. And if you have